Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We're here every week to discuss trends. We try to stay away from politics. We try to stay away from religion. But as it pertains to business, sometimes they get mixed in. But nonetheless, we're here, and we're going to be talking about a couple of topics today. You know, one of the things that Adam and I do that's very powerful is not just look at a singular trend, although that's interesting to talk about. But what's more important is actually blending these trends together. When you have 2, 3, 4, 8 trends that you blend together, that's where the real power comes. And I think today's topic will blend the conversation that's happening around commercial real estate and this commercial real estate Ageddon. You know, everything's kind of happening in that direction from the pundits and other people. And we'll kind of talk about that. And then the other piece that is a conversation we've been having, especially this year, is a conversation about immigration and how it pertains to the workers and people that want to do the work, people that are willing and able, but not willing, but not able to do the work, right? There's some limitations there. So Adam, let's start the conversation with trends as it pertains to commercial real estate, and understanding that you are actually currently in Florida, South Florida. So let's start there.
West Palm Beach, to be accurate for you. You're doing some workshops. I've been sounding the alarm about real estate now for, I guess, about 5 or 6 years, at least. And, it started when I started pointing out that we had way too much retail space. And I wrote some blogs back from 4 years ago, and we started talking about it in our podcast, that with the advent of electronic commerce and how people are buying things through the internet, including buying things from the traditional retail outlets where they just call, place the order, with a company like Walmart, for example. We're getting to where we have too much retail space. And so as of about 6 years ago, we were 50% too much retail space. And that meant that in a lot of areas, there were retail stores that were just going to shut down, people going to walk away. And you can go to about any market today, except a really high growth one, maybe Phoenix or a super high growth market like South Florida, and you'll see a lot of empty retail stores. You'll see empty retail shopping centers, empty Target stores, empty Home Depot stores where they've moved out. So I started sounding the alarm. What does that mean? Well, why? Because you don't have to be an investor to realize when those guys go away, it affects the tax base in a very real manner. Okay. Now, nobody's paying taxes on that retail space. And oftentimes the income is taxed. There's a sales tax associated with the retail, et cetera. And that starts to move away as well. Well, that's what we started seeing 3 or 4 years ago in commercial real estate. We were building a lot of commercial real estate buildings when, in fact, it was unclear that we needed them, and especially when the pandemic hit. You and I started talking in the pandemic that people are now, they're not going to come back to the office. That work from home has existed for 35 years, and the technology has augmented and made that possible. When we got to the pandemic, you had no choice. Employers had to accept it. Most employers forced people into the office out of old notions and biases that you had to get them to work so I can see where they are. And because I don't trust them. I don't trust my employees that they'll work if they're at home. That was basically where a lot of managers and leaders were. I don't trust my own employees. Terrible place to be, by the way. If you can't trust your own employees, that's a bad place to be. The pandemic hit, people had to work from home. And then a lot of these leaders, I was shocked, had some kind of a sense that these employees were all just going to jump up and be thrilled to come back to the office when we got we were able to get immunization, and we were able to decrease the threat, and we were able to move on to different strains of COVID that were not as deadly. They thought, everybody's going to be happy to come back to the office. And what happened was a lot of people said, man, I was commuting. I was losing, let's say, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day on commuting. It was highly inconvenient. I had to hire babysitters, or I had to buy people to transport my children around. I was struggling to be able to take care of my errands, all kinds of things. Now, when we had to start working from home, we saw that we didn't really need to be in the office that often. And that battle is not going to resolve itself towards the employer, because more employers are starting to realize they're going to have to, make a difference, go back, live with the new reality. Okay.
Right.
Just this week,
it's a new reality.
There was a new discussion about Washington, D.C., and you have a lot of government workers in Washington, D.C. And so the government workers, most of them work from home. Now, a lot of these government agencies are saying, we want you to come back into the office 5 days a week. And government employees, they don't make a huge amount of money, but what they depend on is they work 20, 30 years, they get a nice pension. And they're actually, they're having a fit over this. And so they said, why should I come back to the office? Because you should care about my performance. And in a very real way, the things we did in the office, we now do from home. I'm doing the same thing. And you can same metrics, same monitoring of my behavior, everything's there. I'm just working from home. And the government agencies and the people that work for the Chamber of Commerce and DC said, well, we want you to come back because we want the buildings more busy. And we want to make sure that you're spending money eating lunch in the luncheonettes around the corner. And the employees went, excuse me? It's my job to get the bid to pay for these real estate buildings. You want me to pay my money and pay for keeping the Jimmy John's open around the corner? I mean, that doesn't seem like that's not my responsibility as an employee. So every week we're hearing more about this. So the net of it is that we overbuilt commercial real estate based upon the need. The technology was there. You and I were forecasting this when we started the real estate. We started talking about people working from home. So before the pandemic hit, we were saying we got too much commercial real estate. Where are we now? Well, even though you and I made a big deal about this last year, finally, Jerome Powell, the idiot of the year, the idiot of the century so far, who wants nothing but to create recessions, depressions, put people out of work, and somehow thinks that's good for the economy, keeps saying that, okay, we're going to have to, keep interest rates tight. And now he's turned around and said, oh, by the way, in addition to having Silicon Valley Bank fail, and I think it was the other big bank, trying to remember, the Republic Bank, he said, we're probably going to have a bunch of regional banks fail because of commercial real estate failures. So, and Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, same thing. She said, you know what? We got leases coming up. So a lot of these buildings, people have been paying the rent, especially big corporations like the big banks, JP Morgan Chase, or the big tech companies like Google and Microsoft. They had office space. They were paying the rent because they could afford to. And they're saying, when the lease comes up, I'm out of here. I'm not going to pay it. And there's nobody lined up to take that space over. So now what happens, the landlords are sitting there saying, well, how am I going to make the rent payment? How am I going to make the mortgage payment on this commercial real estate? And a lot of these loans are coming up because those guys don't get 30-year mortgages on those buildings. I get 3 and 5, 7-year loans, and sometimes flatter them. But anyway, the loans are coming due, and they're going to sit there and say, you know what? I don't have any tenants. I don't have any money. I can't pay this. And then they're going to be, all of a sudden, this real estate is going to come back onto the marketplace, and people are going to file bankruptcy. And just like we had with Silicon Valley Bank, there's not enough reserves in the regional banks, especially. And a lot of real estate is backed by regional banking. It's the biggest business they have. We use credit cards, and consumer lending comes from national big banks. These guys are going to sit there. They don't take very many leases until they've used up their reserves. And they're going to be sitting there saying, okay, I can't survive. And now the regional banks are going to falter. And you have the head of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury saying the same thing. Very predictable.
Exactly.
And it fits right in. The last point is demographics. Younger people in particular don't understand it. They don't understand why my generation felt like you had to get up 5 days a week, maybe even 6 days a week, drive somewhere, commute, go to work, get dressed up, go to work, all the things that we did. And then you come down a little bit, people kind of like more wary of it, especially when we got to the 24/7 work and we started dressing more casual because we were online all the time. And now the younger people are kind of like, man, I don't get it at all. And if you want me to take a job with you where you want me to get it, commute for an hour each direction, that just ain't going to happen, buddy. I'm not going to take the job. And so that real estate is undoubtedly going to end up being something that's going to create a lot of debt bankruptcies and failures, and that will lead to bank problems.
Yeah, I was going to mention the idea of this, the demographics, and it's a bit of a clash of generational biases. I mean, you hit it on the head. Some of the boomers that are still in power, the mentality is sort of set in a certain way. You've got the generation like myself, the Generation X that are here, sort of in limbo, and then you have the new generation that has no idea the way things used to be. So their new normal is working from home, working all the time, working from their phones. The idea of this nomad, this digital nomad that's out in Bali doing remote work. I mean, it's a clash, and I think that the commercial real estate is going to be one of the first of many. I mean, we've already been talking about other things, the return to work people, but I think commercial real estate is going to take a hit And you just drive around, even Tucson, which, we have a lot of growth. There's a lot of vacant buildings out there,
Yeah.
and you see you see a lot of sort of housing coming up, but the commercial real estate. I mean, there's entire malls that are halfway shut down because nobody moved into the Sears, nobody moved into the Macy's and so forth.
So, for our audience out there, what does that mean for you? Well, first of all, I'd be very unlikely to invest in a real estate investment trust, what we call REITs, REITs. I wouldn't want to be in a commercial real estate REIT. Even though today it might be paying a 7 or 8% dividend yield because REITs have to pay through all of their cash flow, that's highly likely to change. And those REITs are likely to end up with a lot of properties they've invested into on the equity side that aren't going to be able to survive. And then that cash flow isn't coming to the REIT, then it's not going to come to you, both for commercial real estate and retail REITs. I wouldn't want to get near that. Second thing is if you're a small business person, I wouldn't be buying any commercial real estate for my business because it's likely to get a whole lot cheaper, right? And now's not the good time to buy. You have high interest rates and you have prices that are likely to come down when this stuff comes on the market. I also wouldn't take any long-term leases. If somebody wanted to go in, we had somebody on our podcast a few years ago who was a brewer, and he was thinking about, and he had a brewery, and he was doing a little bit of a serving thing where he was bringing some food in for people, that kind of thing. And he was thinking about getting a bigger facility. Remember that? Remember
I
the
do.
company right there in Tucson? And at the time, I said, look, I wouldn't be making any commitments to any long-term leases. I said you could probably negotiate a one-year lease and renew it, and every year you're going to be able to lower the price because if you threaten to move out, the landlord is very likely to know he's not going to be able to get somebody to replace you. And so, from a practical standpoint, when you're looking at this, you should be saying to yourself, okay, what do I need as my business? And how much can I cut back? If you're a retailer, you should probably be saying, I should be promoting my online business, let that grow, and I'm going to have a storefront presence, but I probably maybe only need half of the storefront that I used to have because now it becomes more of a showroom. People come in, they can see the products. I need a little bit of inventory maybe for real-time purchase, but a lot of people can look at the product and I'll
Mm-hmm.
say, and I'll tell them, look, I'll have it delivered to your house in 2 days. Like that's what you do at Best Buy. I recently had a
Right.
television break in my house. I mean, it literally fell off, broke, stepped on block. It's gone. And so I have to get a new television. I go into Best Buy. I'm looking, I want to just get one and take it home that day because the one I have is broken. And I'm looking at these televisions and the guy starts telling me that half of them he doesn't even have in the store. I pick it out and they're going to ship it to me and I'll have it in a day or two, right? Because they're planning that I'm supposed to get it in a day or two and that I should be happy with that. So I'm sitting there saying, okay, if a Best Buy is going down that road, then the small retailers should be doing the same thing. So if you're retail trade, if you have people that work for you, you should be saying, how many desks do I
Yep.
need? How much space do I need? And planning to downsize that because we can see that is the trend. And if you want to have some office, if you want to be, let's say, engaging clients, you say, well, clients are going to come to my office, and I want to say you're a lawyer or an accountant or a number of those kinds of customer interfacing businesses. You say, I'm going to need some office space to meet with my clients. Well, yes, but how much do you need? Right?
Right.
It's not as much as you needed 5 years ago. And at the same time, if you're sitting there on a lease that you had for 5 years, you're in a very strong position to say to the landlord, I'm not going to pay you whatever you've been paying. I mean, it's going to vary market by market, obviously. But, and you could probably, without any effort at all, go online and find real estate you can move into that might be half what you paid on your lease that you had for the last five
Right.
years. So this is stuff that we can look at the trends and we can predict it. We say, look, this is where it's going. The other side of that is now whenever you get ready to look for your hiring, you can say to people, I'm not going to force you to come to the office. So if they're trying to compare a big corporation where they're going to get paid X
Right.
with working for you, they can say, well, I'm going to make say $40 an hour working for X or $100 an hour working for X. And you can say, look, I'm not in a position right now, the size of the company, to pay $100 an hour, but what I can pay is $80 an hour. But what I can also tell you is you're going to work from home, and maybe you're going to come into the office one day a week.
Right.
And we're very flexible and we're very open with the hybrid plan we have. And you'll come in, we'll have this desk you use, rotate about whoever needs it. Just bring your computer because that's where you work, right? It's your computer. You don't need a lot of stuff in your desk. Then the employees are more likely to say, you know what, that fits my lifestyle. That's what I
Right.
want. And so now
I
the
think for
employers in a better position to compete for labor.
yes, I think for business owners today, I think one of the major things that needs to be considered, and I think it just needs to be just part of what you do every month, is really look at your generational biases. What are the biases that you as a business leader are hanging on to, are using like lenses to look through that might be holding you back? I mean, I had a conversation with a business owner a few days ago, and they had this amazing building that they were luckily on a month-to-month lease. And back in the day, they had a 10-year lease, and somehow through the course of time, they got it to a month-to-month, and I was like, fantastic. And she didn't understand what I meant by that. And the idea is, look, things are changing, and they were paying, in my opinion, a lot of money for that space. And you find something for half the amount, and there's another source of funds you can use to grow the business. And not everybody has to be in the office, so you could go from half to a quarter of the space. They do
Yeah.
some light manufacturing, and just that sort of thing, as we've talked in the past, is something that's locking you in. I
Right.
think that idea of lock in is oftentimes misunderstood. Everybody said when I had my business and I bought my building, I had 30,000 square feet, and I was very happy about it. And it was a big celebration. This was what 8-10 years ago, which was great. I needed the space,
I mean,
but
it's
now
bad.
looking at, yeah, it was holding me down. Right at some point in time, when it reached the end of my business cycle, it was holding me back. That what was initially a plus became an albatross around my neck. And so I think that if you're entering a business, or if you have one now and you have some real estate that you're either leasing or you own, you got to think really hard of what's going to be happening in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and make decisions now that will help you to get out of that when you don't need to have that on top of you.
I mean, in the boomer generation, there was a situation of shortage. You had so many babies born between 1945 and 1960 in that era that there was never enough housing. There was never enough office space. There was never enough of anything. Everything's growing. We're trying to get all these people to go to work. Well, now they're not going to work anymore. They're retiring. So we have this big retiree population. They're not working at all, so they don't need to go into the office, right? And so now we have to realize that the new workers, the workforce we have, isn't going to work the way that the other one did. It's just that simple. And it gives you that opportunity to change. So now what we start seeing is you have to think to yourself, well, what's going to happen to all that space? And that's where the opportunity comes in. I think for people that are creative, now it's a real opportunity to think about, okay, we have a home ownership problem right now. If you talk to experts, the cost of housing is too high for young people. Right, it's one of the worst trade-offs we've ever had in terms of income for people under the age of 35 and how much it costs median price of a home in almost every market. I mean, this even goes into smaller states like Kansas. Just all over this is a problem. Not just places like California or Phoenix that we have this problem. And so what we can say is, look, if there's a 2-story or 3-story commercial office space that had a dozen offices in it, remember, we're not just talking about 40-story buildings here. Commercial office space it's like there's little malls that used to have insurance agents and stockbrokers in them. Those are commercial office space as well. You
Yep.
start saying, hey, what if I went into those and I go to the city and I say, look, I'd like to buy that piece of property, but I'm only going to buy it if you'll rezone it to residential and let me convert it into residential. Then what happens is I can buy the property at enough for the bank to not have to write off the loan, and I can have some money to do a conversion. It's not easy to convert a commercial space into a residential space. It's just not constructed the right way with bathrooms and all the things you want, right? But you can
Yeah.
do it. And now a big like 40-story building, that's very, very hard. But these
Yeah.
smaller things like these malls I'm talking about, the commercial malls or the 2 or 3-story buildings that have a dozen offices in them, those are very doable. So
Yeah,
instead of
there's
saying,
a space down the road from here that it's about 8 units. And about 2 years ago, it was the bottom floor. It had 2 stories. It was all light retail, and it was like eyelashes and waxing places, and
"Hmm,
things of that nature. There's a guy that would fix cell phones and whatever, and so they converted that into a mixed use. So the upstairs is now a residence, and the bottom is now the business. So you can have somebody live upstairs, come downstairs, do their lashes, do their fix cell
hmm,"
phones, whatever they got to do. And now it's this cool sort of hip situation where you live and you work in the same place. And that was a something that just got flipped.
which has long been how it is done in Europe, right? If you go back for 100 years, what happened? People tended to not commute like we do in America, where people live in the suburbs and they come into the city. They built their cities so much longer ago that they all expected the fact that the first level, a lot of these buildings were where people conducted business, retail, trades, all that good stuff. And the people lived on the second and third floors of those buildings. That was the way they did it. And now people are starting to realize, hey, that's not a bad idea. It works out pretty good. Now, I want to be very honest. What's the stumbling block here? You have two, and it's not going to be easy. But an entrepreneur that really wants to try to get out there and make some money, you have the opportunity to go to the zoning people and say, look, it's an eyesore for the city if it sits empty. It's bad. And it attracts homeless people, right? It attracts ne'er-do-wells. It attracts drug dealers. Empty buildings attract bad things. We don't want to have that. So let's get it converted into some residential. Would you go through the zoning to make that happen? And try to get some, at least verbal commitments, get some people on board with that. Then what you do is you start talking to the bank. Say, hey, look, that's sitting empty. You've been holding the mortgage. What would it take for you to let me move into that? Can I get a nothing down deal? Can you just let me take over the building for the value of the mortgage, right? So I don't have to put money in it. And then I've got money to convert it into something else. So because this is going to happen. And now, as an entrepreneur, this is one of those opportunities because in 4 or 5 years, the big guys are going to get a lot more active in this. The big guys are already starting to get active in it, right? And they're going to start just picking up all these properties because they can sit there, buy the property first, let it sit empty, then they can hire lawyers to go in and fight for the changes in the law so that they can get it rezoned and they can get it to take care of. But if you move now, there's some real opportunities out there and a lot of places to do this. And it's great for the smaller communities. For a long time, we've been pulling all the people from the small towns into the big towns. That in COVID, a lot of people started saying, hey, life in the smaller towns is kind of nice. I don't have all the commuting problems, the cost of housing, are down lower. It's an easier lifestyle. Like my children can run around the yard without being worried about bad people hitting them and all these kinds of things. So you have people taking that much more seriously. And now some of those towns are becoming really hip, right? Because the entrepreneurs go in and do like you said. They say, here's a building. Let's take these buildings. Let's make them more European of a style. Let's put some cozy retail in it, nice fun stuff. And the second level, we're going to fill that up with people. And then that attracts a good class of people that really want to have community. Right. And so it's an opportunity. So it is likely going to be a big problem. And when it becomes a big problem, the big boys will play. You're going to get your huge real estate players going to step in with millions and billions of dollars. But now is a good time to look at it and be talking to your regional bank. Because those regional bankers, they know these properties, and they know these leases that are coming up, and they know the places that are sitting empty where the tenants aren't going to renew.
This is definitely an opportunity right now, for sure.
Yeah. So start talking to your regional banker if you think this is something you might be interested in, because it is an opportunity that's going to happen. It's going to be tough. And what I fear is that idiot Powell won't realize this quick enough and do something about it to keep the interest rates too high. I mean, we just had a new report on inflation. They said, oh, my God, inflation went to 3.1%. Most of my working life, we never had inflation below 5%. So I'm kind of amazed that this gets people excited at 3.1%. Right. But the number one thing that made the 3.1% instead of 2% was what they called housing. And as we discussed in previous podcasts, it's not how much we actually pay for rent. There's an inferred amount. So they interpret that everybody who owns a house, that their cost of rent went up, even though their mortgage didn't go up, based upon these factors. What certain other rents went up in their city, so everybody's rent went up. It's just bullshit. Right. It isn't true. It isn't real inflation. It's a number that's created, right? And so they're looking at the wrong data. I've complained about this for a long time. If it keeps following through, and then the second point, as we know, is inflation historically has averaged between 2.5% and 3%. 2% has never been a norm ever in the history of the United States or in the history of the European countries. It's always been more of 2.5% to 3%. It's been the historical average for inflation. So setting a 2% target, it's a little bit like setting a sales target super high, so everybody has a stretch to kind of get there. But being realistic about what's going to happen, then 2.5 is actually an extraordinarily good number. 3 is a very good number historically. So, getting excited about 3.1 if we don't see, there should be, and there will have to be a reduction in interest rates. If idiot Powell doesn't do that soon enough, well, then we'll blame him for it. But plan for that. Plan for interest rates to be going down. So if you're thinking about this real estate, think about, okay, I'm not going to have a cost on my real estate of 8 or 9%. on the loan on commercial real estate, I might be very able to get more of a cost closer to 4 or 5% interest on that, and work
So
that into it.
let's thread in the next conversation here regarding, immigration is always a topic that we talk about. Immigration reform, as I mentioned during our pre-call, is the sort of the tip of the spear, is the spear that people use in politics right now to polarize the nation. And, people in the Midwest, they don't understand what's really happening on the border, but at the same time, they complain there's not enough workers. So you had some recent experiences there in your travels that maybe show otherwise, right? That at least Southern
Yeah.
Florida, which is a bastion of Republican stronghold, conservative stronghold, they might be thinking a little bit differently.
Well, yes, I'd go all over the country, and I'd go to Canada doing these workshops. And this week I'm doing them in South Florida, around Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. And the West Palm Beach in particular is kind of the mouth of the beast when it comes to a lot of very conservative thinking, right? And but what I've discovered when I'm in the sessions with these people, and I bring up the topic of demographics, and I say this is a big trend, and we're going to have to deal with demographics. And then I'll say, have you noticed that there's a problem trying to hire workers? And universally, everybody says yes. Yes, we have a problem. We have open positions. We're struggling to get them full. And then I'll say something like, well, what we see from that is, barring a change in immigration law, we're going to have to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robots to try to fill these jobs. And then what happens? And this doesn't matter where I am. Like in West Palm Beach, we're, again, very conservative population. The business people that I'm working with, they go, we've got to do something about immigration reform. Groups of white men over the age of 60 are sitting around saying, we need immigration reform. We need it badly so we can bring these people to work. And they'll say, have a certain number of immigrants, all these things. That is something we need to get our hands around so we can bring these people in. And the day they come, we need to give them a ticket to go to work, because I need to put them on a job. I need to pay them and collect Social Security out of them, collect taxes out of them. But let's get them to work. I need the workers. And it doesn't matter if I'm in Southern California, LA, which you might say is a bit progressive, or now I'm finding out in Southern Florida, which you would say is less progressive or more conservative. It is the same conversation. Everywhere I go, it's the same conversation. And so it's too bad that people think of immigration as a political issue, because if we think about it as a business issue, you start saying, man, we need the workers. And business people are saying, I'll put them to work if you just change the law so I can. But I'm not going to sit here and hire and put people to work when I know it's illegal and I could get fined and I could get in trouble, and I don't want to break the law.
Right.
So change the law so that I can do this.
It's very frustrating. And especially in growing economies, Arizona, we're growing like crazy, right? We've got a lot of things happening, and these big construction projects are taking longer because there's not enough people. I have friends that own companies, drywall companies, roofing companies, that just can't find workers, and their growth and the growth of the community is tied to immigration reform at the end of the day, because there's not enough 18-year-olds that are born here, from here, all that, to fill the jobs that plenty of people from out of the country would be happy to take that job and work for a good wage, pay their taxes. Yeah, they might be sending some of the money home, but who cares if they're paying their taxes and they're living here, they're spending money at the grocery store, they're spending money at the gas station. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And it's going to come to a breaking point. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens this November.
Well, again, if you wind the clock back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, what we had was a shortage of jobs, right? We had all these boomers coming into the workforce, and the economy was growing. But what happened was we had a big population explosion, and it was tough finding work. People got laid off regularly. The power of unions went down because you could overturn the union. People said, "I need a job. I need to get to work." But now demographics have shifted and things have changed. But here's a couple of interesting statistics I looked up. The reality is, not having workers, we can take a look at that. So there's this thing we look at, and it's the percentage of people aged 25 to 54 who are in the workforce. Okay, and if you take a look at so let's say, have we ever added big numbers to the workforce? Yes, and one of it was when women started to work. 1975, when I graduated from high school, less than 1 in 5 women was in the workforce. Right. So if we take a look at this, in 1970, it was 40% of women were in the workforce, okay? 40% in 1970. By the time we get to the year 2000, 80% of women are in the workforce. So think about it, as the population grew, we went from 40% to 80% of women in the workforce between the age of 25 and 54. That's a huge number of people we added to the workforce. In that same time period, the number of men that were in the workforce, employed in the workforce, went from 90% to 86%. In other words, men didn't lose a whole lot of jobs because women went into the workforce. But I can remember in my younger days when men would complain about this. They would be in the office and they'd be upset. And they would say that women are taking our jobs. Women weren't taking their jobs. Women were going to work, and we were producing a lot more jobs. And that's the mindset that we have to get into, is that we have the jobs, so we need the workers. If we add workers by coming up with reforms that allow us to use more immigrants as workers, it's not taking jobs away, especially now that the demographics are in the opposite direction and we don't have the workers to begin with.
Yes, exactly. So to our listeners, really think about, and our viewers, think about these changes that are happening right now and really lean into them. It's a matter of mindset. It's a matter of mindset and execution. You've got to actually act on these things. And sometimes that's against your own biases. So consider your generational bias that we all have. And I think that these are massive things that need to be taken into consideration if you want your company, your business to continue to grow. And especially in these next couple of years where these changes are happening so quickly, you've got to be ready and you've got to make these moves. Any last words for us, Adam?
Yeah, I want to give you one last statistic. In 2019, the people, native-born Americans, between the age of 25 and 54, 81% of them were employed. Okay? That dropped down in the pandemic, right? In 2023, 82% of native-born Americans between the age of 25 and 54 are in the workforce. So in other words, we have, as a percentage, more people at work in the workforce now than we had before the pandemic. So there are no other workers out there. That's the point I have to keep driving home. They aren't out there. So that means that you either have to get artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, other ways to get the jobs done with people, or it's immigration reform, or a combination of both.
Very well said, Adam. Very well said. I invite all of our viewers and listeners to go back at our archives, really look at what we've done. We have a YouTube channel, of course. The Spark Partners is the handle. Spend some time, look around, understand that some of the things we're saying are definitely way before the big mass media captures them. And we've done some podcasts where we've predicted certain things, and 18 months later, then the media catches on. And so this is a very, very dynamic podcast, and people that listen to it regularly are very happy with the fact that they're getting some insights, some things that are early on. And sometimes that 18-month or 12-month lead time for them is an upper hand to make these moves before everybody else starts making them.
Yep.
So with that, Adam, have a great rest of your trip, and we'll talk with you later.
And we've been accurate. Thank you, Manny.
Exactly. Cheers.